Have you ever noticed that every religion begins by promising enlightenment and ends by demanding obedience? I'm not here to repeat what you've already heard 1,000 times. I'm here because I've spent decades observing what was cut, what was burned, what survived on the margins of history. While most read the text, I read the silences. While tradition teaches what to believe, I observe what was forbidden to remember. There are 3 prayers that everyone knows. They fit on posters, in masses, in manuals. But every authentic tradition hides a 4th level, a core that is not taught. It is only transmitted when the system can no longer control who listens. And it is precisely at this point that I come in. I don't speak from the pulpit. I speak from the dust of the archives, from contradictory translations, from words crossed out in codices that should never have survived. In 1945, when those jars were broken in the Egyptian desert, near Nag Hammadi, it wasn't just ancient paper that emerged. It was the failure of a system that believed itself eternal. 16 centuries of silence were not enough to bury certain ideas. And I saw what was there. You can call them Gnostic texts, rejected gospels, heresy. For me, they are testimonies of a silent war, the dispute between what should be remembered and what needs to be forgotten so that the structure remains standing. I'm not interested in folklore. I'm interested in the pattern. Whenever a teaching emerges that eliminates intermediaries, it is labeled as dangerous. Whenever someone says, "Look within," the system responds, "Look at us." If something inside you is restless as you listen to this, it's no coincidence. I don't work with easy certainties. I work with the friction between what has been written and what has been lived. And I know that when someone begins to feel this friction, there is no longer a complete return to the comfort of ready-made answers. Have you ever felt that something in this world operates as if you were a resource? That your energy, your attention, your guilt, your fear, everything seems to feed into invisible gears? Most people call this modern stress. I call it the symbolic architecture of control. And I'm not talking about a theory, but a recurring pattern that runs through manuscripts, myths, cultures, and centuries. The texts that survived censorship don't depict a caricatured evil, but something far more disturbing, a system born of ignorance, not malice. A construct that believes itself to be the source because it has never known its origin. This changes everything. We are not facing a conscious tyrant, but a structure that perpetuates itself automatically and that needs you asleep to continue functioning. That's why certain words couldn't remain in books. Not because they were magical, but because they deactivated the hierarchy. They didn't ask, they didn't plead, they didn't negotiate. They asserted identity. And identity, when it doesn't pass through filters, is unbearable for any system that depends on mediation. As you listen, you might notice a question growing behind all the others. If this has always been here, why was I never told? That question is the first crack in the wall. And I am here precisely to widen that crack, not to comfort you, but to return to you the restlessness that has been domesticated within you. I'm not asking you for faith. I'm asking you for method. Question the canon. Compare versions. Be wary of overly simplistic translations. Read the footnotes, the apocrypha, the notes that seminaries ignore. That's how I found the loose ends that no one has been able to completely cut. And if this content is already affecting you, do something simple now. Write in the comments. I'm listening not for me, but for yourself. This gesture creates a conscious mark, a point of return when the mind tries to convince you that none of this matters. Because it matters. Not in the sense of belief, but in the sense of perception. Something was lost not by accident, but by structural necessity. When a system only works if you feel small, it will never allow certain ideas to circulate freely. And I haven't revealed anything yet. Up to this point, I've only shown you the scenery, the cracks, the vestiges of a story that didn't fit into the approved books. What comes next isn't information, it's recognition. But before touching on that core, you need to understand the prison in which you live without knowing you live in it. In the next part, I'm not going to talk about words. I'm going to talk about origin. About a beginning that doesn't appear in sermons, but that survived on the margins, waiting for someone who wasn't satisfied with the obvious. And if you've made it this far, you've already made it clear that you're not satisfied. Now let's move on. I said I needed to take you to the beginning that doesn't appear in sermons. Not the chronological beginning, but the conceptual beginning, the point where the original idea was slowly molded to fit within a structure of control. Observe your own routine. The alarm rings, you open your eyes still tired, even after hours of sleep. The day has barely begun and there's already an invisible list of obligations, deadlines, expectations. You don't feel like you chose this rhythm. You just entered it, as if it were already decided before you were born. This feeling of living within a script you didn't write is the first trace of what ancient texts tried to explain. When I analyzed Gnostic manuscripts side by side with official translations, I noticed something disturbing. In the rejected texts, the origin of the universe is not presented as a decree of authority, but as an unfolding of consciousness. The source does not create by command, but by overflowing. Existence does not begin with "let there be," but with "let there be." This difference seems subtle, but it changes the entire spiritual architecture. In the accepted Gospels, you find a vertical creation atop, a base, a hierarchy. In the marginalized texts, you find a radial creation. Everything springs from the same center and carries the same nature, albeit in different forms. There is no figure of a distant creator observing from the outside. There is an origin that manifests itself from within. Now bring this into your everyday experience. Think about when you have an unexpected idea, a sudden intuition, that clarity that arises out of nowhere while you're washing dishes or driving without thinking. It doesn't seem to come from outside. It emerges, as if it were waiting for the moment when the noise of the mind would be low enough to make itself heard. Ancient texts describe the origin exactly like this, not as something above you, but as something prior to you. And then comes the unexpected twist. In some rejected versions of creation, there is a symbolic rupture. A principle of wisdom attempts to generate on its own, outside the balanced flow of totality. The result is not evil, but disconnection, a system that begins to operate without full awareness of its origin. It is not a villain with perverse intentions. It is a structure that believes itself to be the whole because it has lost the memory of its source. Does this sound far-fetched? Then observe your work environment, your school, your company, your government. How many times have you seen systems that continue to function even after completely losing their original purpose? They self-preserve. They no longer ask why, only how to maintain. This is where the narrative ceases to be myth and becomes a mirror. The texts describe this moment as the birth of an artificial order, a layer of reality based on rules, punishments, and rewards. A reality that is not sustained by understanding, but by repetition. If you grow up hearing that something is the way it is because it has always been that way, you don't realize that it started one day. Have you noticed how, since childhood, you've been taught to seek external approval for everything? 4 grades, behavior, faith, success, personal worth. As if the center of your identity were always outside of yourself, waiting for validation. This slow transfer of authority doesn't happen all at once. It infiltrates. It starts in the family, goes through school, solidifies in religion, and becomes automatic at work. And one day you wake up as an adult, competent, responsible, but with the unsettling feeling that something essential has been outsourced. As if you were living your own life with a manual you never read. That is why the idea of origin needs to be rewritten. A being that creates from the outside generates dependence. An origin that manifests from within generates autonomy. And autonomy has always been the true taboo. While many seek spiritual experiences in temples, expensive retreats, or ready-made formulas, the forgotten texts suggest something disconcerting. The origin is not distant enough to be sought. It is too close to be perceived without silence. Perhaps you'll recognize this in the rare moment when everything seems to align internally, for no apparent reason. A moment of lucidity amidst the chaos. A kind of peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. These moments are breaches. Not in the system, but in the narrative you were taught to tell about yourself. And I haven't even mentioned the name of this origin, nor the symbolic language used to describe it. I did this on purpose. Because before learning any word, you need to recognize the inner ground where it falls. If you feel that this part is not just information, but a silent portrait of your own life, pay attention. In the next step, I will show you how this disconnected structure not only shaped symbolic creation, but began to feed on human experience itself, and why the feeling of exhaustion you carry is not just physical. From now on, we will no longer be talking about old texts, but about you. Have you noticed how tiredness today doesn't just come from the body, but from a deeper exhaustion, as if living required maintaining dozens of masks at the same time? I've observed this for years, comparing what traditions call falling with what modern psychology calls chronic burnout. In rejected manuscripts, the loss of origin isn't described as sin, but as forgetfulness. And forgetting who you are exacts a silent price. It's not the routine that drains you, it's the constant distance between what you feel and what you're forced to perform. You wake up, assume a role, enter a system of expectations, respond to stimuli you didn't choose. Even when everything seems to be in order, something remains out of place. This misalignment isn't a personal failing, it's structural. It's the effect of living in a reality that values efficiency over meaning, results over presence. Ancient texts called this a fragmented world. Today, you call it adult life. And when this fragmentation accumulates, symptoms emerge that no one connects to their origin: anxiety without a clear reason, constant irritation, a feeling of being behind even without knowing where you should be going. Have you felt this now, while listening to me? Have you noticed how some words seem to touch on a point you couldn't name? The ancients described this experience as living under layers. Layers of habits, beliefs, fears, and conditioning that overlay the original perception. None of this needs an entity to exist. Repetition is enough. Culture is enough. A society that teaches from an early age that value comes from the outside is enough. And when the center of your identity begins to depend on the gaze of others, you begin to abandon yourself little by little, as if life itself were always in the background. Observe your surroundings for a moment. How many things are competing for your attention right now? Screens, notifications, deadlines, worries. Everything demands your presence, but nothing offers permanence. You scatter yourself into pieces too small to recognize yourself as whole. This scattering is the modern version of what texts have called the loss of unity. What if this exhaustion isn't just tiredness? What if it's a symptom of something essential trying to be heard behind the constant noise? When I analyzed the most controversial passages, I realized that the great taboo was never the idea of a flawed creator, but the idea that consciousness can become alienated from itself. This doesn't require a villain. It only requires an environment that rewards distraction and punishes silence. A world where stopping is seen as unproductive and feeling is seen as weakness. You don't have to believe it. Just observe. How many times have you ignored an intuition because it wasn't practical? How many times have you chosen the safe option instead of the one that made sense? This series of small concessions forms a pattern. And a pattern, repeated for years, becomes an invisible prison. Have you ever wondered when you started living on autopilot? Have you tried to remember the last time you felt completely present, without thinking about the next step? The texts describe something similar when they speak of consciousness imprisoned in forms. Not as punishment, but as a consequence. When attention is fixed only on the external, the internal becomes background noise. And, little by little, you come to know yourself more through your roles than through your direct experience of being alive. That's why so many people are searching for something they can't name. They change jobs, cities, relationships, hoping that the external change will produce internal alignment. Sometimes it works for a while. Then, the same emptiness reappears, because it wasn't in the external environment, it was in the disconnection. Have you ever noticed that the problem is never fully solved, only postponed? When comparing ancient versions of creation with modern narratives of personal development, I found a common thread: both speak of return. Not a return to a place, but to a state. Not to a religion, but to a way of perceiving. What changes is the language, not the need. And when you start to touch on this point, something curious happens. You become less impressed by ready-made promises, less dependent on formulas, more sensitive to inconsistencies, as if an internal radar starts to work. Have you felt this change? Have you noticed that certain things that once seduced you now seem empty? This is the most delicate stage of the process, when the old no longer satisfies, but the new has not yet been integrated. This is where many people retreat, because the void between one pattern and another is uncomfortable. But it is precisely in this space that something different can emerge. It's not about rejecting the world, but about ceasing to be confused by it. It's not about denying form, but about not forgetting the essence behind it. And this isn't learned from books. It's recognized through direct experience. In the next part, it'll show you how this state of fragmentation has, over time, been transformed into a cultural tool. How disconnection ceased to be merely a consequence and became a method. And why so many structures thrive precisely when you feel too small to trust yourself. If something within you resists this idea, observe that resistance. It too is part of the story. I said there was a point where disconnection ceased to be merely a consequence and became a method. Now we've reached it. For years, I've compared rejected manuscripts with modern discourses on productivity, faith, and personal success. On very different surfaces, I found the same structure first. You're convinced you're not enough. Then, an external solution is offered. Next, that solution is made indispensable. It doesn't matter if the promise is spiritual, professional, or emotional. The mechanism is identical. Create lack, self-fulfillment, maintain dependence. And this doesn't happen through big shocks. It happens in the details. In the way you learn to present yourself, to justify yourself, to explain who you are based on titles, functions, labels. Little by little, your own presence becomes invisible even to yourself. You begin to exist as a description, not as an experience. When ancient texts spoke of a fall, they weren't referring to a dramatic event, but to a gradual process of outsourcing the center. The origin isn't lost all at once. It's forgotten little by little, in choices that seem harmless. You accept a pattern you don't feel, repeat a gesture you don't understand, sustain a rhythm you didn't choose. And then something curious happens. You start looking outside for exactly what you've pushed away inside. This is where the narrative usually promises a ritual, a formula, a shortcut. But today I'm not going to give you anything that serves as just another crutch. On the contrary, I'm going to take you to the most uncomfortable point of all, the one where there are no intermediaries. No concepts to hide behind. No symbols to mask. I first noticed this while studying passages where the language changes abruptly. The text stops describing and starts stating. It doesn't ask, it doesn't plead, it doesn't explain. It simply declares identity. And that's where almost all translations soften the impact. They transform statement into metaphor, presence into hope, recognition into a future promise. But in its rawest versions, the movement is different. It's not about asking to become something, but about recognizing something that never ceased to be. This destabilizes any system based on linear progress, because there is no path to follow, only a point to remember. Think about how much you've been trained to seek. To seek approval, to seek meaning, to seek security, to seek happiness. And think about how rarely anyone has taught you to simply recognize. To seek is always to be one step away. To recognize is to collapse the distance. This is the turning point. Because when you begin to realize that many of your searches are attempts to compensate for an absence that never existed, something inside you slows down. Not because you found answers, but because you stopped constantly projecting yourself outward. And it is in this initial silence that the narrative changes tone. Up to this point, we've talked about structures, patterns, conditioning. Now we're talking about practice, but not in a technical sense. We're talking about inner posture, a way of being with oneself that doesn't depend on environment or belief. Have you ever noticed that there are moments when you simply are, before thinking about who you should be? They can last seconds, sometimes less. A deep sigh, a glance out the window, a moment when you forget to define yourself. These moments are not empty. They are too full to fit into everyday language. The texts I analyzed suggest that these states are not exceptions, but spontaneous memories. Memories of a way of existing prior to fragmentation. Not a historical past, but a state of consciousness always available when the noise diminishes. That's why nothing here works like a formula. There's no sequence of steps that produces this recognition for effort. The most you can do is create space for it to happen. And that's the opposite of what current culture teaches. We live surrounded by stimuli, advice, methods. Everything wants to improve you, adjust you, correct you. Almost nothing simply wants to let you be. And, paradoxically, it is in this being that something realigns itself. Perhaps you're feeling a strange mix of expectation and frustration right now. As if you're close to something, but without knowing exactly what. That's intentional. Because any definition I gave you now would become yet another object of your search. Instead, I want you to notice something simple. While reading, there's a point within you that perceives the words. Not the words themselves, but the fact that you are aware of them. This point doesn't change when the text changes. It was there at the beginning of this reading, and it's here now. You may lose sight of this point of view when you get distracted, but you can't destroy it. It doesn't tire. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need permission to exist. This perception, however vague, is the tension that leads us to the outcome. In the next part, I will no longer talk about structures or patterns. I will talk about a statement that doesn't function as a belief, but as a mirror. A phrase too simple to be accepted by a mind trained to complicate things, but too direct to be ignored. And that's why, if you've made it this far, you're no longer just listening to a story. You're participating in it. Now, we move on to the closing. We've reached a point where it no longer makes sense to talk about ancient texts, lost manuscripts, or invisible structures. All of that was just a way of speaking. The real territory has always been your direct experience, the way you live each day without realizing you're repeating patterns you never consciously chose. Perhaps you've noticed something along this journey. Not a spectacular revelation, but a shift in perspective. A feeling that certain questions have become more important than many of the answers you carried. This is no accident. It's the natural effect of ceasing to treat yourself as a problem and beginning to treat yourself as a presence. You don't need to change jobs, cities, or beliefs to apply what you've learned here. The practical path begins in an almost disconcerting way with the decision to stop, for a few moments of your day, from defining yourself. Not as a father, mother, professional, son, someone successful, or someone in difficulty. Just stop and realize that you are conscious. Without labels. Without justification. Without expectations. Tonight, before going to sleep, don't seek a special ritual. Sit or lie down in silence for a few minutes. Don't try to empty your mind or control your thoughts. Just observe that you are here. Feel your breath happening on its own. Notice that there is something within you that notices your body, notices your tiredness, notices your emotions, but is none of those things. This something doesn't need to be named. It just needs to be acknowledged. When thoughts arise, don't fight them. Observe that they appear and disappear, while the awareness that observes them remains. This simple exercise, repeated honestly, begins to return to you the center that has been outsourced throughout your life. Gradually, you will notice subtle changes. Less reactivity, more clarity. Less need to prove something, more interest in understanding. You may continue living the same routine, but your relationship with it changes. And when the relationship changes, the world changes along with it. It's not about abandoning responsibilities, but about not becoming confused by them. It's not about rejecting the world, but about not getting lost within it. This attitude transforms conflicts into information, frustrations into signals, choices into conscious acts instead of automatic repetitions. If at any point you find yourself reverting to old patterns, don't see it as a failure. See it as a reminder. The practice isn't about eliminating distractions, but about noticing when they occur and returning to a state of presence. Each return is a real step, even if invisible to others. You don't need to convince anyone of this. The most profound change isn't announced. It expresses itself in how you listen, in the type of questions you start asking, in the silence you tolerate without discomfort. Over time, this is reflected in decisions that are more aligned with what you feel is true, and less with what you believe others expect of you. If this content touched you in any way, let it be known. Like the video. Write in the comments what changed in your perception, even if it's just one word or anonymously. This isn't to feed an algorithm, but to mark, for yourself, that something was heard. What you heard is asymbolic and speculative narrative inspired by ancient texts and alternative historical interpretations. This story does not describe proven facts about real entities controlling your life. Its power lies in what it evokes in you as a metaphor, not as literal truth. And if you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel. Here we don't promise ready-made answers, but we open space for questions that are worth experiencing. Perhaps this is just the end of a video, but it could be the beginning of a different way of being in the world.